I am 81 years old, and a few months ago I realized something that scared me more than getting sick or growing old. I realized that if I died quietly in my apartment, it might take days before anyone noticed. That thought came to me one morning while I was standing in my kitchen. I had just dropped a cup and it shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp and loud, but after it faded, there was nothing. No voice from another room, no phone ringing, no one asking if I was all right. I stood there longer than I needed to, looking at the broken pieces, and that was when it hit me. There used to be people who would have heard that sound, people who would have called, people who would have shown up. I didn't lose my friends in some dramatic way. I didn't argue with them. I didn't storm out of anyone's life. I let my friendships die quietly. When I think back to how it all began, it doesn't feel sad at first. It feels normal, almost comforting. I grew up believing that friends were just part of life, like the weather. You didn't worry about them disappearing. They were simply there. In my younger years, friendships formed because life pushed us together. School did that first, then work, then neighborhoods where everyone knew each other's routines. You saw the same faces every day. You didn't have to plan anything. You didn't even have to try. In my 20s and 30s, I was surrounded by people most of the time. Coworkers, neighbors, friends from earlier years. We didn't talk deeply, but we talked enough. Lunch breaks were loud. Evenings sometimes stretched longer than planned. Weekends were shared without much thought. I remember sitting at tables with friends, eating simple meals, complaining about work, laughing at small things. Nothing special, but it felt steady. I assumed it would always be there. I truly believed that once you built friendships, they took care of themselves. Then life filled up. Work demanded more time. I wanted to do well. I wanted to be responsible. I wanted to provide. I told myself I was doing the right thing by focusing on what needed to be done. Friendships, I thought, could wait. I got married. Our days became structured. Wake up early, get ready, commute, work. Come home tired, eat dinner, sleep, repeat. There wasn't anything wrong with that life. It was full in its own way. But something small started happening that I didn't notice at the time. Phone calls became shorter. Meetups became less frequent. Any time turned into some time. I always had a reason. I was busy. I was tired. It was a long week. I told myself I would make time later when things settled down. They never really settled down. Most days were ordinary, almost identical. Breakfast at the same time, coffee from the same mug, the same drive, the same chair at work. Even lunch happened like clockwork. We sat together, but we talked less. Everyone had somewhere else to be, something else to worry about. In the evenings, my wife and I shared quiet routines. Dinner, television, a few words about the day. Sometimes I'd think about calling someone, but the moment passed. It felt late, or unnecessary, or I assumed they were busy too. I didn't feel lonely then. That's important to say. I felt occupied. There's a difference. Years passed without asking permission. One friend moved away for a job. We promised to keep in touch. We meant it. Neither of us tried very hard. Another friend changed shifts at work. We stopped overlapping. Then we stopped talking. There was no anger, no goodbye, just distance. At the time, I didn't think of it as losing anything. I thought this was simply how adulthood worked. People drifted. Life moved on. I believed that if I ever really needed someone, they would still be there. I see now how naive that was. The first real crack appeared when my wife got sick. It wasn't sudden. It stretched over months. Hospital visits, long nights, a quiet fear that sat in my chest even when I didn't name it. Some friends checked in at first. Messages, short visits, kind words. I appreciated them, but I didn't lean on anyone. I didn't want to be a burden. I thought being strong meant handling it alone. When she died, people came to the funeral, old faces I hadn't seen in years. They hugged me, They told me to call any time. I nodded. I believed them, but I didn't call. Grief made everything feel heavy, including the phone. Days blurred together. Meals lost their shape. Silence filled the apartment in ways I wasn't prepared for. After a while, the messages slowed. Then they stopped. Not because people didn't care, because time kept moving, and I wasn't moving with it. I thought retirement might change things. I imagined long conversations, catching up, reconnecting. What it really gave me was time to notice how few people were left in my daily life. The calendar stayed empty. The phone stayed quiet. And slowly, I began to understand something I had avoided for years. This wasn't something that happened to me all at once. It happened because I let it happen, one quiet day at a time. And that realization didn't come with tears or anger. It came softly, and it stayed. By the time I truly noticed how small my world had become, it already felt permanent. That was the second thing that surprised me. How quickly temporary turns into, this is just how it is now. My days after retirement were slow and predictable. I woke up without an alarm. I made coffee for one. I read the same sections of the newspaper. I walked the same streets, nodding at people whose names I didn't know. Sometimes I went an entire day without speaking out loud. At first, I told myself I enjoyed the peace. After years of noise and responsibility, quiet felt earned. But peace and loneliness can look very similar from the inside. I didn't know which one I was living with until much later. There were moments when I thought about reaching out. I would pick up the phone, scroll through old numbers, and then set it back down. I didn't know what to say anymore. It had been too long. I worried I would interrupt their lives. I worried they wouldn't remember me the way I remembered them. So I stayed silent. And silence, I learned, gets easier the more you practice it. Another loss came quietly. A man I worked with for decades died suddenly. We hadn't spoken in years, yet his death shook me. Not just because he was gone, but because it reminded me how thin my connections had become. I went to his funeral and recognized faces I once saw every day. We exchanged polite words, promised to stay in touch, and went back to our separate lives. I started counting things I never thought I would count. How many people would notice if I didn't show up somewhere? How many numbers I could call without feeling like a stranger? The answers were smaller than I expected. One evening during a power outage, I sat in the dark for hours. No television, no phone, just the sound of the city outside my window. That night, more than any other, I felt the weight of my choices. Not one big choice, 1,000 small ones. The times I didn't call, the invitations I postponed, the friendships I assumed would wait. I don't feel anger about it. Anger looks for someone to blame. This doesn't have a villain, it just has time. At 81, regret isn't loud. It doesn't shout or beg. It shows up in quiet moments, like when I set an extra plate back in the cupboard, or when I hear laughter outside and realize I don't know where it's coming from. Sometimes I imagine what my life might feel like if I had treated friendships the way I treated work. If I had shown up even when I was tired. If I had understood that staying in someone's life takes as effort, not intention. But imagining doesn't change anything. All it does is remind me of what still matters. Here is something I didn't understand when I was younger. Friendships don't usually end because people stop caring. They end because people get busy and assume there will be more time later. Later is not guaranteed. I'm not saying this as advice. I'm saying it as someone who believed he had plenty of time, right up until he didn't. If you are listening to this and someone crossed your mind, don't ignore that feeling. You don't need the perfect words. You don't need a reason. A simple message is enough. Most people are closer than you think, just quieter. And if you're someone like me, looking back and wishing you had done things differently, be gentle with yourself. We all did the best we could with what we understood at the time. These days, I still sit at that same kitchen table. I still make coffee for one. But now, when the phone rings, even if it's just a wrong number, I answer it. I don't rush conversations anymore. I let them take the time they need. I can't bring back the friendships I let fade, but I can speak honestly about them now. And sometimes, that feels like a small way of keeping them alive. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Many people carry the same quiet regrets, even if they don't talk about them. If you feel comfortable, share your story in the comments. I read them, and they matter more than you might think. If there's someone in your life you've been meaning to reach out to, consider doing it today. Not because you should, but because one day you may wish you had. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you can subscribe. Time moves whether we're paying attention or not. People stay closer when we do.